The world woke up to heartbreaking news, but inside the Osbourne home, that heartbreak had already been living in the walls for months. Sharon, Jack, and Kelly Osbourne had spent countless nights sitting by Ozzy's side, watching the man who had once commanded the loudest stages in the world slowly become quiet. No cameras, no fans, no spotlight, just a family trying to hold on to the man who meant everything to them. And when the moment finally came, when Ozzy Osbourne took his last breath, it felt as if the whole world suddenly paused. But for his family, it wasn't the end of a legend. It was the beginning of a new, painful journey, one filled with memories, unanswered questions, and the impossible task of learning how to live without the heartbeat of their home. Sharon Osbourne had always been the strong one, the fighter, the one who pushed Ozzy, protected him, and turned his wildest dreams into history-making moments. But even she admits that nothing, none of the fame, none of the success, none of the years spent managing one of the greatest rock stars of all time could prepare her for losing her husband. She said she felt the silence first. It wasn't loud or shocking. It was almost gentle, like a candle fading out. But the moment she realized he was gone, the quiet turned into something else, an emptiness she never imagined she'd feel. To Sharon, Ozzy was the Prince of Darkness. He was her partner, her best friend, her family's anchor. And now, the anchor had drifted away. Jack Osbourne reacted differently. As the oldest son, he tried to be strong for everyone around him. But he couldn't hide the way his voice cracked when he remembered his father's final week. He spoke about moments no one else saw, small, fragile memories that will stay with him forever. The times Ozzy would squeeze his hand, even when speaking had become difficult. The faint smiles when Jack played old Black Sabbath songs just to see the spark in his father's eyes. The way Ozzy still tried to joke, still tried to lighten the mood, even when his body was failing. Jack said those moments felt like tiny messages, reminders that Ozzy never lost his spirit, even at the end. Kelly, on the other hand, admitted that she completely fell apart. For her, Ozzy wasn't a rock icon. He wasn't the man on stage with wild eyes and impossible energy. He was her dad, the man who picked her up when she cried, the man who told her she could be anything, the man who calmed her storms when the world felt too heavy. Losing him felt like losing her foundation. She said she walked around the house still expecting to hear his raspy voice calling her name. She expected to hear him humming in the kitchen, or shouting at the TV, or laughing at something no one else found funny. But each room she walked into reminded her that those sounds were now memories, beautiful ones, but memories all the same. And the world felt it too. Fans gathered outside the Osbourne home, leaving flowers, candles, handwritten letters, posters from concerts, and drawings of Ozzy as the rock hero he had always been. Some cried, some prayed. Some blasted his music as loud as possible, honoring him the only way they knew how, through the sound he gave them. Strangers hugged strangers. Young fans stood beside fans who had followed Ozzy since the 70s. It didn't matter who they were. They were all united in grief for a man who changed the world. But the most powerful reactions came from inside the family. Sharon said that in the days after Ozzy's passing, she didn't sleep. She wandered the house, touching his guitars, flipping through old photos, replaying old voicemails just to hear him speak again. She felt as if every corner held a piece of him. And instead of breaking down completely, she realized something important. Ozzy had left more than memories. He had left a legacy of love, rebellion, survival, and resilience. A legacy stronger than grief. Jack talked about a strange moment that happened 2 days after his father passed. He said he was sitting alone, struggling to process everything, when he felt a sudden wave of calmness. He said it was as if Ozzy was still there with him, reminding him that he wasn't alone. Whether it was grief, imagination, or something spiritual, Jack didn't try to define it. He simply held on to it, believing that his father was still watching over them in his own mysterious way. Kelly shared something even more heartbreaking. She admitted that she regretted not saying certain things before her father passed. She said she wished she had told him more often how much he meant to her. But then she remembered their last real conversation. She said Ozzy looked at her with soft, tired eyes and said, "You're my girl, always." And that was enough to keep her going, even when the pain felt unbearable. In the first week without him, the Osbourne home became a safe space for shared stories. Relatives, lifelong friends, and people who had worked with Ozzy for decades came together. It wasn't a formal gathering. It wasn't a planned memorial. It was simply people sitting together, talking about the man they loved. They laughed about his mischief. They cried about his struggles. They remembered his strength, his humor, and his incredible ability to keep going, even when life threw everything it had at him. Everyone spoke about Ozzy not as a legend, but as a man, a father who loved too deeply, a husband who tried his best, a friend who cared more than he ever showed. And suddenly the family realized something. Ozzy's story wasn't ending. It was becoming something bigger, something shared, something eternal. For Sharon, the days after his passing were a strange combination of unbearable pain and warm memories. She said she kept hearing his voice in her head, "You're stronger than you think." And despite everything she felt, she tried to believe him. She said she owed him that much to keep going, to stay strong, and to make sure his legacy lived on in the most honest, unfiltered way possible. The Osbournes were grieving, but they weren't hiding. They were letting the world see their pain, their love, and their truth, because that was what Ozzy always believed in: raw honesty. No masks, no pretending, just real, unfiltered humanity. And as the first chapter of their life without Ozzy began, the family realized something powerful. The world hadn't lost a legend. It had gained a legacy, and they would spend the rest of their lives honoring it. Ozzy Osbourne's final years were not defined by fame, cameras, or the loudness that had surrounded him for decades. They were defined by something much more human: his battle with time, his struggle with illness, and the quiet moments that revealed who he truly was when the world wasn't watching. The Osbourne family had always lived in the spotlight, but what happened behind closed doors during Ozzy's last years was something only they could understand. And now, months after his passing, they were finally ready to share that truth. Sharon Osbourne said that the world saw the legend, the performer, the man who screamed into microphones and electrified crowds, but she saw something else: a husband who fought every single day just to stay alive. She described mornings where Ozzy would wake up in pain but still crack a joke just to make her smile. She remembered nights when she'd sit by his bed, making sure he was okay, and he would whisper, "Stop worrying about me, woman. I'm not going anywhere." And even though they both knew time was catching up to him, he still tried to make her worry less. That was Ozzy, always trying to protect the people he loved, even when he was the one hurting. Jack said that over the last 2 years, he started spending more time alone with his father. They would sit in the living room, drink tea together, and talk about everything: music, life, regrets, dreams, and memories from long before the fame came. Jack said those conversations changed him. For the first time, he saw his father not as a rock star, but as a man who had lived a roller coaster life, faced impossible battles, and survived things that would have broken anyone else. Yet through it all, Ozzy never lost his kindness. He never lost his humor. He never lost the strange, beautiful way he made people feel safe just by being himself. Kelly remembered a different side, one that she still struggles to talk about. She said there were days when Ozzy couldn't get out of bed, when his illnesses drained so much of his strength that even breathing felt like a challenge. On those days, she'd sit with him quietly, holding his hand, and he would squeeze her fingers gently as if to say, "I'm still here." Those simple gestures meant everything to her. She said she learned more about love in those moments than in her entire lifetime. But the truth is, the Osbournes weren't always prepared for what was coming. They had hope, strong hope, that Ozzy would recover again just like he had done so many times before. He was known for cheating death, surviving the impossible, rising from the ashes every time the world thought he was gone. He had defied doctors' expectations for years. So when things began to decline, the family didn't fully believe it at first. They kept thinking, "He'll get better. He always does. He-s Ozzy." Sharon said that what hurt her the most was watching the man who once leaped across stages now struggle just to stand. She said that the first time she saw him lose balance, she cried alone in their bathroom because she didn't want him to see her break. She didn't want him to feel like a burden, but Ozzy always knew. He wasn't blind to what was happening. He would often say, "I've had a good run, love, a long, crazy, beautiful run." Those words haunted Sharon because she refused to think of his life as something finished. Jack also opened up about the guilt he felt. He said there were times he wanted to ask more questions, spend more time, have deeper conversations, but he kept thinking he had more time. Everyone does that with the people they love. We all assume tomorrow will be waiting for us, but life doesn't work like that. And when the decline became rapid, Jack realized he had to be fully present. He put work aside. He put everything aside. He wanted his dad to feel loved, supported, and surrounded, not by nurses or doctors, but by family. Kelly said that the hardest part was watching her father try to stay strong for them. Even on his worst days, he didn't want pity. He didn't want sadness. He didn't want whispered conversations or worried looks. He wanted laughter. So he would make silly faces, crack jokes, or start singing random words to distract them. She said those moments were priceless because they proved something. Even when his body was failing, Ozzy's spirit was untouched. As the years went on, Ozzy's world became smaller. The giant arenas were gone. The screaming fans were far away. His home became his universe, a quiet, warm place filled with memories, photographs, and personal treasures from decades of music history. But even in that small world, his presence remained massive. Every room felt like him. Every wall held a part of his soul. And every person who entered felt the gravity of being near someone who had lived a life so big, so loud, so unforgettable. Toward the end, the Osbournes learned that grief doesn't start when someone dies. It starts when you realize you're watching a slow goodbye. Sharon said she felt it months before his passing. Jack felt it in the quietness of their tea conversations. Kelly felt it in the way he held her hand a little longer each time. But they all pretended not to see it because accepting it meant accepting a future without him, and they weren't ready for that. One of the most emotional moments the family shared was Ozzy's final family dinner. It wasn't planned, it wasn't dramatic, it was simple. They all sat together, ate comfort food, talked about old memories, and laughed in that warm, familiar Osbourne way. Ozzy didn't say anything profound, he didn't give a final speech, but he looked at each of them with a softness that felt like goodbye, and deep down they knew. After his passing, the family finally spoke openly about those last years because they wanted the world to understand the truth. Ozzy wasn't just a rock legend battling illness. He was a man who loved fiercely, fought bravely, and gave everything he had until the very end. And even though his final years were filled with pain, they were also filled with love, healing, and moments that the family will treasure forever. These years weren't the end of Ozzy's story. They were the beginning of the legacy he left behind, a legacy built not on fame, but on family. When the news of Ozzy Osbourne's passing finally broke, it didn't just shake the entertainment world, it shook the entire planet. From the streets of Los Angeles to the neighborhoods of London, from small rock bars in Brazil to giant stadiums in Germany, people felt the loss as if they had lost someone from their own family. It was as though the world had collectively paused, letting out a long, painful breath. Ozzy wasn't just a musician, he was an era, a force. A phenomenon that had touched millions of lives in more ways than most people ever knew. The first reaction came from the fans, the ones who had loved him since the days of Black Sabbath. Online communities exploded with emotional posts. Fans shared pictures, concert tickets, autographs, and stories of the first time they heard Crazy Train or War Pigs. Some wrote about how Ozzy's music got them through depression, breakups, addiction, loneliness, or loss. Others shared how his voice had become the background of their childhoods. One fan wrote, "Ozzy's music saved my life. I didn't know him, but he understood me better than anyone." Another wrote, "My father raised me on Ozzy, now we're both crying together." These were not just fans, they were people who felt like Ozzy had given them a piece of himself. On social media, hashtags like "Thank You Ozzy," "Ozzy Forever," and "Prince of Darkness" climbed to the top trends instantly. Celebrities, musicians, athletes, actors, and even political figures posted tributes. They talked about the times Ozzy inspired them, scared them, motivated them, or made them feel brave enough to be themselves. Some shared funny stories, some shared emotional ones, and some simply said thank you. Even those who never listened to his music recognized his cultural impact. Ozzy wasn't just part of rock history, he was part of global history. But the most powerful reactions came from ordinary people. Fans began gathering everywhere, from his childhood streets in Birmingham to the iconic Hollywood Walk of Fame. They brought candles, handwritten letters, handmade signs, portraits, guitars, and massive posters. Some people started singing his songs, others stood in complete silence, and many cried openly, comforted by strangers who felt the same heartbreak. It didn't matter where they came from or what language they spoke, grief became a universal language. In Birmingham, Ozzy's hometown, crowds filled the streets for days. Long lines formed near the house where he grew up, and people placed flowers in front of murals painted decades earlier. Local pubs played nothing but Black Sabbath and Ozzy solo tracks for a full week. People said it felt like the whole city had lost its loudest heartbeat. In Los Angeles, fans camped outside the Osbourne home. They didn't shout or invade privacy. They simply stood there holding candles, quietly singing his songs. Some left letters for Sharon, Jack, and Kelly. Others left small gifts, rosaries, bracelets, handwritten prayers, and drawings from children who grew up watching the Osbournes on TV. The family watched from inside, overwhelmed by the love pouring in from around the world. Radio stations dedicated entire days to Ozzy's legacy. Music channels replayed his performances, interviews, and behind-the-scenes footage. Newspapers printed front-page tributes. Magazines released special issues. Even people who had never been fans found themselves reading about him, because Ozzy's story wasn't just about music. It was about courage, survival, love, and living life on your own terms. Week after his passing, the global memorial began. In different countries, people organized candlelight vigils, flash mobs singing his songs, motorcycle parades, and charity events honoring his battle with addiction and Parkinson's. In Mexico, thousands gathered in the main square to celebrate his music. In Japan, fans created a massive digital mural filled with fan art. In Italy, church bells rang as a local priest dedicated a prayer to him, saying, "He fought demons and still chose love." Even more powerful were the stories shared by people who had met Ozzy in real life. A security guard recalled how Ozzy once stayed an extra hour after a concert signing autographs for fans with disabilities. A young musician remembered Ozzy giving him a guitar pick and telling him to never give up on the sound inside you. A hotel worker shared how Ozzy tipped every single staff member because he said he knew how hard they worked. These stories painted a picture of a man who never forgot the value of kindness, even when he was struggling within himself. But there was one reaction that stood out above all: the unity his passing created. For decades, people of different musical preferences debated about genres, styles, eras, and heroes. But on the day Ozzy passed, those debates disappeared. Metal fans, rock fans, pop fans, and even classical listeners joined hands in honoring a man whose influence had crossed every boundary. He was a rebel, a warrior, a survivor, but above all, he was a symbol of freedom, the freedom to be loud, honest, and unapologetically yourself. The Osbourne family watched all of this unfold with a mixture of heartbreak and gratitude. They said they felt like the world had wrapped its arms around them. Sharon, who had spent years managing and protecting Ozzy, said she had never seen anything like this level of love. She said it made her realize how deeply Ozzy had touched humanity, not just through music, but through the way he lived his life, fearless, flawed, honest, and incredibly real. Jack said that seeing fans from every continent honor his father made him understand something profound. Ozzy didn't just belong to the family, he belonged to the world, and he believed his father would have been humbled by such a massive outpouring of love. Kelly couldn't stop crying. She said she always knew her dad was loved, but she never realized how many lives he changed without even trying. She said, "He wasn't perfect, but he was ours, and now I know he was everyone's." What happened after Ozzy's passing was more than mourning, it was a movement. A collective celebration of a man who broke rules, broke barriers, and broke expectations. The world didn't just say goodbye. The world stood up to honor a legend, a father, a husband, a fighter, and a soul who showed generations how to live boldly. And as the days passed, the family realized something powerful. Grief is heavy, but love is heavier. And the world's love for Ozzy was lifting them up slowly, one message, one song, one tribute at a time. Inside the Osbourne home, grief didn't look glamorous or dramatic. It wasn't like the scenes people imagine when they think of celebrity families mourning. It was raw, messy, unpredictable, and painfully real. Behind the tall gates, away from the candles and fans waiting outside, the Osbournes were learning how to breathe again in a world that suddenly felt too quiet. The man who had filled every room with his energy, humor, and chaotic charm was gone, and they were left to figure out how to live with the void he left behind. For Sharon, the first few days after Ozzy's passing felt like walking through a dream she never asked to have. She would wake up at night expecting to hear him calling her name. She would reach across the bed expecting to feel his hand. Sometimes she even found herself talking to him out loud, forgetting he wasn't there. She said the silence was the cruelest part. Ozzy had always been noisy, stomping around the house, humming songs, making jokes, shouting for his dogs, or calling out to her with that familiar, playful tone. Now the silence was loud enough to break her heart. But she didn't let herself fall apart in front of everyone, not at first. She wanted to be strong because strength was what Ozzy always saw in her. Jack was different. He didn't want to talk, didn't want to cry loudly, didn't want to make speeches or share long stories. Instead, he went inward. He spent long hours in Ozzy's music room, surrounded by guitars, vinyl records, tour posters, and handwritten lyrics. Sometimes he would sit on the floor with his back against the wall, just listening to old tapes of his father talking, laughing, or rehearsing riffs. He said he felt closest to Ozzy in those moments. Like his dad was still there, still creating, still alive inside the music that had defined his entire existence. But grief hit Jack in waves, quiet ones that came without warning. Sometimes he would hear one chord from a song his father loved and break down instantly. Kelly handled grief in the most emotional and visible way. She cried openly, screamed into pillows, and clung tightly to her mother and brother when the sadness became too much. She said she felt lost, like someone had taken the map of her life and burnt it. Ozzy had always been the family's emotional compass. Whenever Kelly felt overwhelmed or scared, she used to run to her father. Even if he didn't have the perfect words, he always had the perfect hug, and now there was no one to run to. She struggled the most with guilt, wondering if she had done enough, said enough, been there enough. Sharon reassured her constantly, but Kelly's heart needed time to heal. But even in the darkness, the Osbournes found something unexpected: each other. They were not just a family grieving a legend. They were a family grieving their center, their protector, their constant, and grief, despite its heaviness, began to pull them closer. Every night they started gathering in the living room. No cameras, no visitors, just the three of them sharing stories about Ozzy. Some memories made them laugh so hard they cried, like the time Ozzy got lost in his own house because he thought a mirror was a doorway, or the time he tried to cook breakfast and nearly burned the entire kitchen down, or when he argued with the TV remote for 2 hours because he thought it was broken, only to realize he was pointing it at the wrong device. Other memories were heavier, like his relapses, his illnesses, the nights he couldn't sleep from pain, or the moments he looked at them with fear in his eyes because he didn't know what was happening inside his own body. But even those memories brought healing. They reminded the family that they had been through storms before and they had survived them together. Sharon became the glue holding them all together, even as she was breaking inside. She pushed herself to get out of bed every morning because she knew Ozzy would hate to see her crumble. She cooked breakfast, checked on Jack and Kelly, and tried to keep the house running. But the truth was, she often cried while washing dishes or folding laundry. She missed his laughter echoing through the halls. She missed hearing him say, "Sharon, where's my bloody coffee?" She missed the small arguments, the silly conversations, the warmth of his presence. Some days she felt like half of her soul had been stolen. Jack stepped into a new role: protector. He made sure his mother wasn't alone for too long. He checked on Kelly when she disappeared into her room for hours. He even tried to use humor to lighten the mood, something his father had always done. Jack's strength didn't come from hiding his emotions. It came from facing them head on. He asked questions, talked openly, and encouraged his family to do the same. He said healing wasn't about pretending everything was okay. It was about accepting that everything wasn't and learning to move anyway. Kelly brought vulnerability into the home. She wasn't afraid to express her pain. She cried on her mother's shoulder, held her brother's hand, and talked endlessly about her dad. Her openness gave Sharon and Jack the space to open up too. She reminded them that it was okay to grieve loudly. It was okay to miss him. It was okay to fall apart and then slowly put the pieces back together again. Her emotions weren't a weakness, they were the pathway to healing. Together, the three of them built small rituals to keep Ozzy's spirit alive. Every morning they played one of his songs while making coffee. Every Friday night they watched old episodes of the Osbournes, laughing at the chaos they lived through. Every Sunday they visited his favorite spot in the backyard, sitting together in silence or sharing memories. These rituals didn't erase the pain, but they made the pain meaningful. They realized grief wasn't something to get over. It was something to live with, something that becomes softer over time but never disappears. And they were okay with that, because grief, in its own strange way, was proof of love, deep love, real love, the kind that doesn't end when a heartbeat stops. And so, inside the Osbourne home, grief became not just something to survive, but something that united them. Something that taught them how to lean on each other. Something that showed them that even in loss, family remains the strongest force in the world. In the months following Ozzy Osbourne's passing, the Osbourne family realized something deeply important. Grief might break your heart, but legacy is what keeps the heart beating. And if there was one thing Ozzy left behind that could never fade, it was the legacy of a man who lived louder, loved deeper, and fought harder than almost anyone who had ever stood on a stage. For Sharon, Jack, and Kelly, protecting that legacy became their mission, one that gave them strength, direction, and a renewed sense of purpose. Sharon was the first to step into that role. She had spent decades shaping Ozzy's career, standing beside him through every rise, every fall, every scandal, and every victory. She knew his story better than anyone. She knew what he wanted to be remembered for, and she knew what parts of his journey the world needed to see. So she began planning a tribute that wasn't polished or filtered. She wanted it honest, raw, real, just like Ozzy. She gathered old videotapes, tour footage, handwritten lyrics, unreleased recordings, and family home videos. Some tapes were dusty, untouched for years. Others were filled with moments the world had never seen: Ozzy playing with his kids, cooking in the kitchen, dancing with Sharon in the living room, crying during difficult times, laughing until he fell over, struggling with addiction, fighting to get sober, and celebrating small victories only the family knew about. Sharon knew that these pieces of Ozzy's life told the truth that he was so much more than the Prince of Darkness. He was a human being who lived every day with extraordinary intensity. Jack took on a different part of the legacy. As the filmmaker of the family, he understood how to tell stories in a way people could feel. So he started working on a documentary that would show the world who Ozzy really was behind the fame. He didn't want a simple biography. He wanted something immersive, something that felt like stepping into Ozzy's mind, his humor, his struggles, and his victories. He interviewed musicians who had toured with Ozzy, producers who had shaped his albums, childhood friends who knew him long before he became a star, and fans who said his music saved their lives. But the most emotional interviews came from the family themselves. Sharon spoke about the love story that built their lives. She talked about moments no one knew, the arguments, the lessons, the pain, and the unbelievable amount of love they shared. She didn't hide the darkness. She didn't hide the chaos, because Ozzy never hid anything. Jack told stories from backstage, times when his father would pep talk terrified musicians before shows or comfort fans who were crying at meet and greets. Kelly talked about the soft side of her dad, the man who read her stories at night, who told her she was stronger than she thought, who held her hand through her darkest moments. Together, these interviews created a portrait of Ozzy that the world had never seen before. Kelly found her own way to protect the legacy too. She began writing a book about what it was like growing up in a home where chaos was normal, love was loud, and music was everywhere. She wrote about the lessons her father taught her: how to stand up for herself, how to embrace her weirdness, how to face her fears, and how to laugh even when life felt impossible. She wanted young people to know that Ozzy wasn't just a rock icon. He was a man who understood struggle, a man who survived it. A man who taught his children to survive too. But legacy wasn't just about projects. It was also about preserving Ozzy's spirit in everyday life. The family decided to keep his music playing throughout the house. Not loudly, not dramatically, just softly, like the heartbeat of their home. Sharon said it made her feel like Ozzy was still walking down the halls, still sitting in his favorite chair, still part of every moment. Jack said it reminded him of being a kid, waking up to the sound of his dad humming along to songs he was working on. Kelly said it made the house feel warm again. They also kept his chair exactly where he left it. His glasses stayed on the small table beside it. His favorite blanket remained folded nearby, not as a shrine, but as a reminder that his presence was still with them. That love doesn't disappear just because a life ends. One of the most powerful things the family did was create what they called an Ozzy garden in the backyard. It was a small, quiet space filled with his favorite flowers, a bench he used to sit on, and a plaque with one of his favorite quotes, "I'm still standing." Sharon came up with the idea, and Jack and Kelly helped bring it to life. It became a place where they could sit and talk to him, cry, laugh, or simply be silent. A place that reminded them he was still part of their lives. But the most emotional tribute came not from Sharon or Jack, but from Kelly. She suggested something deeply personal, a tradition they would repeat every year on Ozzy's birthday. Instead of mourning, they would celebrate. They would gather with family, play his favorite songs, cook his favorite foods, share their favorite stories, and laugh until it hurt, just like Ozzy would want. Because Ozzy hated sadness. He hated feeling like a burden. He would never want people to cry over him forever. He would want them to celebrate the madness, the magic, and the memories. The Osbournes also made a promise to always correct anyone who tried to simplify his life into headlines or rumors. They wanted the world to know that Ozzy's legacy wasn't about controversy or chaos. It was about resilience. It was about creativity. It was about a man who took the pain inside him and turned it into music that healed millions. Sharon said it best, his legacy is not what he did on stage, it's what he left in people's hearts. And that became their mission, to protect the heart of his story, not the headlines, not the myths, not the rumors, the heart. The more they honored him, the more they healed. The more they kept his spirit alive, the more they began to understand that Ozzy never really left. He lived in every memory, every lesson, every song, every laugh, and every moment they shared. Legacy wasn't just about remembering the man. It was about continuing the love he gave them, every day, in every way. The Osbourne home felt different now. It was quieter, softer, and filled with a kind of silence that only arrives after a great storm has passed. But inside that silence, something powerful lived, memories, laughter, lessons, and an unbreakable bond. This chapter of their lives was not about losing Ozzy. It was about carrying him forward in a way the world would feel forever. Sharon often sat in the living room where Ozzy used to nap with the TV playing too loud. She would close her eyes and remember the small things people never saw, the way he hummed when he walked around the house, the way he pretended to be annoyed but secretly loved when the kids teased him, the way he always asked, "You good, love?" even on days when he was the one who needed help. Those tiny moments had now become the heartbeat of every new day for her. Kelly, on the other hand, faced everything head-on. She said grief felt like a heavy bag she had to carry everywhere, but she refused to let it drag her down. She reminded everyone that her father was a fighter. She kept saying, he didn't survive all those years just to be remembered with sadness. He'd hate that. So she filled her days with music, with stories, with everything that made her feel close to him. She even picked up some of his old habits, like late-night kitchen talks and blasting rock music for no reason. It made her smile, knowing he would laugh at her trying to imitate him. Jack found peace behind the camera. He began documenting the family in a new way, not for a TV show, not for the world, but for them. He recorded Sharon cooking, Kelly singing to the baby, moments of quiet reflection, and the rare but precious times when laughter broke through the sadness. He said it helped him understand life the way Ozzy explained it, not perfect, not planned, but real. He wanted his children to grow up knowing their grandfather not as a legend on stage, but as the man who joked about everything, spoiled them with toys, and told the same stories 100 times. Amy, who lived more privately, joined the family more than before. She brought a calmness that everyone needed. She reminded them that love does not disappear just because someone is no longer here. She helped her siblings heal in small ways, quiet messages, subtle support, warm dinners, and soft guidance. She said she understood now why her father always wanted the family close. Life was too unpredictable, too fragile. As months passed, the Osbournes realized something important. They weren't trying to move on. They were learning how to move forward with Ozzy still at the center of their lives. His pictures stayed on the walls, his jackets still hung where he left them. His music played in the hallways, nobody tried to erase anything. Why would they? His presence was a comfort, not a wound. Sharon began working on a tribute project that would show the real Ozzy, not just the Prince of Darkness, not just the rock icon, but the husband who held her hand before every big moment, the father who tried his best even when life got messy, the man who spent decades proving love could survive anything. She wanted the world to know that behind the wild stories and the fame was someone kind, gentle, and deeply human. Kelly wanted to honor him through music. She started writing again, and every lyric carried a memory. She even considered releasing a tribute album, not for charts or fame, but as a gift to fans who loved her father as much as she did. She said, "If Dad taught me anything, it's that music is how you keep the soul alive." And that became her mission, to make sure the soul of Ozzy Osbourne reached the next generation. Jack had a different plan. He wanted to create a documentary about grief, not the sad version most people talk about, but the true version. The part where families argue, cry, laugh, remember, and grow. He wanted people to understand that grief is not a straight line, it's a circle. It keeps coming back to you, reminding you of what you lost, but also what you were lucky enough to have. Through all of this, fans continued to send letters, art, videos, and stories about how Ozzy had changed their lives. Some people said his music saved them. Others said watching the Osbournes show helped them feel less alone in their own messy families. These messages became treasures the family kept close. They realized Ozzy's influence wasn't limited to arenas and stages. He shaped lives in ways they couldn't even imagine. One evening, the family gathered for a small celebration. Not a sad one, a meaningful one. They cooked his favorite food, played his favorite songs, and shared memories while sitting around the fire. Sharon raised a glass and said, "He gave us everything he had. Now it's our turn to protect what he left behind." Kelly leaned into her, crying but smiling at the same time. Jack nodded, holding his child, knowing that even though Ozzy wasn't physically there, his love was everywhere around them. That night something shifted. The grief didn't disappear, but it softened. It became less like a storm and more like a gentle wave that carried them. They felt him in the laughter, in the music, in the warmth of the fire. And for the first time in months, they didn't feel broken. They felt connected. The Osbournes understood now that legacies aren't built only through fame or success. They're built through love, through lessons, through the moments people rarely see. And Ozzy's legacy was bigger than music, bigger than TV, bigger than any title the world had given him. It lived in his family, in their strength, their unity, their courage to face grief honestly and openly. As the night came to an end, Sharon whispered something she had been repeating to herself since the day he passed. "He may be gone from our sight, but not from our lives." That became the truth the Osbournes carried forward. They didn't say goodbye. They simply held him closer in a new way. And through every memory, every story, every act of love, Ozzy continued to live, not as a legend, not as a myth, but as their heart. And that is how the Osbourne family chose to remember him, unfiltered, honest, united, and filled with love, forever. The Osbourne family believed they had already shared every memory they could, but as time passed, new stories began to surface, stories that revealed a deeper, softer side of Ozzy that the world never truly saw. And Chapter 7 of their healing was all about discovering those hidden pieces of him that continued to guide them long after he was gone. Sharon was the first to notice it. She found an old notebook in Ozzy's desk while cleaning one morning. It wasn't filled with lyrics or tour notes. It was filled with messages he never showed anyone, small reminders to himself about how much he loved his family. In one corner he wrote, "Tell Sharon thank you more often." On another page, "Call Kelly and check on her." There was even a little doodle of Jack and his kids with the words, "Be there for the little ones." These weren't grand statements, they were tiny, private promises, and seeing them brought Sharon to tears. She realized her husband had spent his last years quietly trying to be the best version of himself for them. She placed the notebook on the shelf in the living room where everyone could see it, calling it Ozzy's Heartbook. When Kelly discovered it, she broke down. She held the notebook close, reading page after page. She said she always knew her father loved them deeply, but she didn't know how much he worked behind closed doors to express it better. She whispered he was trying every single day, even on days when life hit him hard. It made her feel even more connected to him, like he was still teaching her how to be strong, how to love boldly, how to stay true to yourself no matter what. Jack reacted differently. He smiled. He said, "This is Dad, pure Dad, soft, sweet, awkward, and real." He started bringing the notebook into his interviews, not to gain attention, but to share the truth about his father, that the real Ozzy was not a monster of rock, but a man who tried his best, who battled demons but never let go of love. Another chapter of healing opened when fans began sending rare footage and old concert clips the family had never seen before. A young fan from Japan sent a video of Ozzy backstage giving a pep talk to a small band, telling them, "Never forget why you're here. Music is love. If you don't love it, it won't love you back." The band said they never forgot that moment. It pushed them to keep playing for years. Stories like these started coming from everywhere. A security guard from one of Ozzy's tours shared that Ozzy used to buy food for the staff and sit with them instead of eating with VIPs. A stage crew member said Ozzy once postponed a rehearsal because he saw a crewman crying and refused to start until he made sure the man was okay. Someone else wrote that Ozzy hugged them after they told him his music saved their life. These stories spread like fire across the fan community, and the Osbournes realized something powerful. Ozzy had planted seeds of kindness everywhere he went, and now those seeds were growing all around them. Sharon decided to start a new tradition for the family. Once every month they would host a small dinner, or sometimes a simple tea gathering, where they invited fans, friends, or anyone who had a meaningful memory of Ozzy. They called it Ozzy Nights. It became a warm, emotional space where people laughed, cried, and celebrated the man he truly was. During one of those nights, an older fan shared something that touched everyone deeply. He said he met Ozzy in the 1980s during a difficult time in his life. He felt lost, depressed, and ready to give up on everything. But Ozzy spoke to him backstage, looked him straight in the eyes, and said, "Mate, life is ugly sometimes, but you're stronger than you think. Don't let the darkness win." The fan said those words saved him. Hearing that, Kelly couldn't hold back tears. She said softly, "He saved people without even knowing, and he thought he was the one who needed saving." Everyone nodded because they knew it was true. While the family celebrated these stories, they also discovered more about themselves. Sharon realized she had been too focused on being strong. She allowed herself finally to slow down and breathe. She began writing letters to Ozzy, letters she kept in a drawer but read out loud whenever she missed him. She said it helped her feel like he was still listening. Kelly learned something new too, that grief didn't have to break her. She realized she carried her father's fire inside her, his bravery, his humor, his ability to rise after every fall. She started to live more boldly, speaking her truth, standing up for herself, and protecting her family the way he protected her. Jack became the emotional anchor of the family. He made sure everyone checked in on each other. He planned family trips, game nights, simple dinners, anything that kept them connected. He said, "Dad would hate to see us drifting apart, so we won't, ever." Amy found a way to honor her father privately. She began writing poems about him, poems she didn't plan to publish. They were for herself, for her own healing. She shared one with the family that said, "You are gone from the world, but not from my breath." Sharon cried for a long time after reading it. Slowly, the Osbournes grew stronger. Their grief didn't vanish, but it turned into something softer, something like gratitude. They realized grief is not the end of love, it is the proof that love lives on. Near the end of the year, the family planned a public tribute, something grand but personal. They picked a large theater in Los Angeles and filled it with candles, photos, guitar pieces, handwritten notes, and Ozzy's favorite memories. Fans from all over the world attended. Some came dressed like Ozzy, some carried candles, some simply came to say thank you. Sharon stood on stage and said, "He lived loudly, he loved deeply, and he left beautifully." The whole room went silent. Then Ozzy's songs filled the hall and everyone sang together, not in sadness, in celebration. The Osbournes looked around and realized Ozzy was everywhere, in every face, in every voice, in every heart. This was not the end of the story. This was the beginning of his legacy being carried into the future, not through fame, but through love. And the Osbourne family walked out that night knowing one thing for certain. Ozzy didn't leave them, he simply moved into a place where love never dies. As the seasons changed, something began to shift inside the Osbourne family. Grief was no longer the center of their days, it had softened into a quiet companion. The sharp pain of losing Ozzy had turned into a gentle ache that reminded them of how deeply he was loved. Chapter 8 marked the moment when the Osbournes stopped surviving their loss and started rebuilding their lives with purpose, strength, and new meaning. Sharon was the first to feel this change. For months, she had lived in a world where every corner of the house whispered his name, but now instead of breaking her, those whispers comforted her. She began waking up with small goals, watering the garden Ozzy once loved, cooking meals he used to brag about, and writing down memories before they faded. She even returned to producing, not because she wanted to stay busy, but because she wanted to create something that carried Ozzy's honesty into the world. One morning, Sharon stepped outside and saw a single rose blooming in the garden. It was a rose Ozzy had planted years ago, one that rarely survived winter. Tears filled her eyes, but this time they weren't only sad. She whispered, "You're still here, aren't you?" This moment became a symbol of Chapter 8 for her, a reminder that love finds ways to return even when you think it's gone. Kelly found a different kind of peace. After months of writing, recording, and quietly healing, she decided to share one of her songs with her family. The song wasn't polished, and she didn't want it on the radio. It was raw, emotional, and filled with memories of sitting beside her father on long car rides, listening to the same rock tracks over and over. Her song had a line that made everyone silent. I lost you in the dark, but I still see your light. When she finished singing, the room stayed quiet for a long time. Even the baby seemed to understand the weight of the moment. Sharon hugged her tightly and whispered, he would be so proud. Kelly nodded through her tears and said, I'm not singing for the world, I'm singing for him. Jack was going through his own transformation. He became more reflective, more grounded, more aware of how fast life moved. He found himself slowing down to appreciate small things, his daughter's laughter, his mother's stories, even the simple joy of making coffee in the morning. He realized that his father's death had awakened something inside him, a voice telling him to value the moments that matter. He spent more time with his children, teaching them lessons his father taught him. He told them stories about Ozzy, how he never gave up, how he treated everyone with kindness, how he believed laughter could fix almost anything. Jack once said, I want them to know him through me, and he meant it. Every bedtime story, every shared memory, every laugh he passed on became part of their grandfather's legacy. Amy's healing was quiet but profound. She began painting again, something she hadn't done since she was young. Her paintings weren't sad. They were full of color, deep blues, fiery reds, warm golds. She said painting helped her understand emotions she couldn't express with words. One of her paintings, a golden light breaking through a dark storm, made Sharon cry. It reminded her of how Ozzy fought through his darkest days to give his family the bright moments they cherished. Each of them, in their own way, was moving toward acceptance, not of losing Ozzy, but of living with the love he left behind. Then something extraordinary happened. A close friend of the family discovered an unreleased voice message Ozzy recorded during one of his final quiet mornings. It wasn't meant for the world. It was simply Ozzy talking, reflecting on life, on family, on what truly mattered to him. In the recording, he said, if I disappear tomorrow, promise me one thing, don't close the door, keep living, keep laughing, and don't let my memory be a shadow, let it be a light. When the family listened to it together, the message felt like a blessing. It was as if Ozzy himself was guiding them, reminding them to live boldly, love deeply, and keep moving forward. Kelly broke down, gripping her mother's hand. Jack stared at the floor, trying to hold back tears. Amy looked out the window, letting the message settle in her heart. Sharon closed her eyes, whispering, we promise. The recording became something sacred, something they played when the world felt heavy or when they needed strength. Inspired by this message, the family decided to start a project that would outlive all of them, a foundation in Ozzy's honor. A foundation dedicated to helping young musicians who struggled, who felt misunderstood, who needed someone to believe in them. Sharon said, Ozzy believed in giving people a chance. We'll continue that for him. The foundation wasn't about fame or publicity. It was about love, legacy, and carrying forward the values Ozzy lived by: kindness, resilience, and the courage to be yourself. When news of the foundation spread, fans supported it with overwhelming passion. They shared stories of how Ozzy changed their lives, how his music helped them survive their darkest moments, how his humor brought light into their homes. The Osbournes realized that his legacy was not just living through them, it was living through millions. Chapter 8 became the chapter of strength, renewal, and purpose. The chapter where grief transformed into gratitude. The chapter where the Osbourne family learned how to live again, not without Ozzy, but with him in a new way. As Sharon said one night while the family sat together, he didn't just leave memories, he left directions. And that became the guiding truth of their days. Ozzy's story wasn't over, it was still being written through every song Kelly created, every memory Jack passed on to his children, every painting Amy touched with emotion, every project Sharon brought to life, and every fan who whispered, "Thank you, Ozzy." The Osbourne family began Chapter 9 with something new: hope. Not a loud, dramatic kind of hope, but a quiet, steady one. The kind that slowly fills the empty spaces grief once occupied. As they took steps forward, each of them discovered new paths shaped by Ozzy's spirit, by his words, by the lessons he left behind without even meaning to. Sharon started traveling again. For months after losing Ozzy, she couldn't imagine leaving the house that still smelled like him. But one morning she woke up and felt something different, an energy, a pull, almost like a whisper telling her it was time. She packed a small suitcase and visited the places she and Ozzy used to go when they needed to breathe. Quiet beaches, small cafes, old movie theaters, spiritual retreats. At a seaside town, Sharon sat with a notebook on her lap, letting the ocean wind hit her face. She wrote about their early years, how they fought for everything they had, how they survived storms that would have broken most couples, how their love stayed strong even when life tried to tear them apart. She wrote about the laughter, the madness, the chaos, the softness. And as she wrote, she felt something surprising, not sadness, but gratitude. Gratitude that she had lived a life so full, so unforgettable, so fiercely loved. Meanwhile, Kelly stepped deeper into her music. Her tribute album for Ozzy was no longer just an idea. It had turned into a journey, one that changed her from the inside out. She spent hours in the studio crying, laughing, remembering, singing with every emotion she once held back. One night, she played a nearly finished track for the family. The song was called Home Is Where You Are, and it spoke about how Ozzy's presence could still be felt in the walls of their house, in their memories, and in the rhythm of their lives. When the final note played, everyone sat silently. Then Jack whispered, "It sounds like him." And that was the highest compliment anyone could give. Jack, on his own path, began filming the documentary he had dreamed about. It wasn't flashy or dramatic, it was honest. He captured real conversations with people who loved Ozzy, friends, musicians, old crew members, and even fans who had met him by chance. Everyone shared stories the world had never heard before. One fan said, "He made me feel seen in a world that ignored me." Another said, "I didn't meet a rock star, I met a real human being." Jack knew this documentary wasn't just for the world, it was for his children too, so they could grow up knowing the truth, that their grandfather wasn't just a legend, but a gentle, funny, deeply loving man who made mistakes but never stopped trying to be better. Jack hoped his film would show the truth that grief didn't destroy the Osbourne family, it transformed them. Amy moved quietly but meaningfully through this chapter. She found strength in spending time outdoors. She began hiking mountains, walking long forest trails, watching the sunrise from peaceful hillsides. Nature helped her breathe again. One morning, she hiked alone to a high cliff overlooking the city. As the sun rose, she closed her eyes and whispered, "I miss you, Dad, but I'm okay." It was the first time she truly believed it. Each of them was healing in their own way, but the biggest change came when they decided to open Ozzy's personal studio for the first time since he passed. The studio had remained untouched, guitars still hanging on the walls, notebooks filled with random lyrics, half-finished tracks, old tour jackets, and even a mug he never washed properly. They stepped inside together, breathing in the familiar scent of wood, old metal, and the faint smell of coffee. It felt like stepping into a living memory. For a moment, none of them spoke. Then Sharon said softly, "Let's do something with this room, not a shrine, something alive." They spent the day cleaning, organizing, and discovering hidden treasures. Old tapes of Ozzy humming melodies, silly voice memos, letters he wrote but never sent, tiny gifts fans had given him, and one guitar pick labeled "For Jack's Kid One Day." It was like finding pieces of his soul scattered everywhere. By sunset, the room had changed. It didn't feel lonely anymore. It felt alive again, warm, full, meaningful. They decided to turn the studio into a creative space for the whole family. Kelly could record there, Jack could edit his documentaries, Amy could paint, Sharon could write, and Ozzy's presence would be in every corner, watching over all of them. A few weeks later, something magical happened. A small group of young musicians from the foundation they launched visited the house. Sharon invited them into the studio, telling them, "This place belonged to someone who believed in second chances, so we're giving that chance to you." The musicians were overwhelmed. Some cried. One said, "This is holy ground." Watching them play in Ozzy's room felt surreal, but it also felt right. His legacy wasn't supposed to gather dust. It was meant to inspire, to grow, to spread. That night, the Osbournes gathered in the studio, sitting on the floor as the young musicians practiced. Sharon leaned against the wall with her hand on her heart. Kelly sat cross-legged, smiling softly. Amy swayed to the rhythm. Jack recorded the moment quietly, knowing it would become one of the most powerful scenes in his documentary. Music filled the room, new music, fresh voices, hopeful tones. And for the first time in a long time, the Osbournes didn't feel the heaviness of loss. They felt pride, they felt joy, they felt Ozzy. Sharon whispered he would love this. And everyone knew she was right. As the chapter came to a close, the family realized something extraordinary. Ozzy's life had ended, but Ozzy's story had not. It continued through them, through fans, through music, through love. And Chapter 9 became the moment they finally understood the truth. Some people never leave, they live on in everything they touched. Chapter 10 became the moment when the Osbourne family realized that their journey with grief had transformed into something much larger than themselves. This chapter wasn't only about healing anymore, it was about carrying forward the parts of Ozzy that the world still needed. It was about teaching others what they had learned, about sharing not just their pain, but their strength. Months had passed, and the Osbourne home felt different in the best way possible. The grief that once weighed heavily on every room now existed as a warm presence, a quiet reminder of love, not loss. The studio was alive with creativity. The foundation was changing lives. The documentary was taking shape, and each member of the family was beginning to shine again in their own way. Sharon stood at the center of it all. She had become the compass, the storyteller, the keeper of truth. Her days were still emotional, but she walked through them with a kind of grace she never thought she had. Every morning she lit a candle for Ozzy, not out of sadness but out of respect. She whispered, "Let today be good," and somehow it always was. Her writing project grew into something much bigger than she expected. What started as a private notebook of memories turned into a heartfelt book, a tribute to the man she loved for more than 4 decades. Not a typical rock biography, but a deeply personal collection of stories, lessons, and confessions. She wrote about the nights they spent laughing until 3 a.m., the concerts where she watched him become larger than life, the battles they fought behind closed doors, and the tiny miracles that kept them together. One evening, as she read a chapter aloud to the family, her voice cracked when she reached the line, "He taught me how to survive, but he also taught me how to live." Kelly hugged her tightly, whispering, "Mom, this book will help so many people." Sharon wiped her tears and said, "I hope so. If one person finds strength because of his story, then it's worth it." Kelly's life had also begun to shift. Her tribute album was nearly complete, and the songs had taken on a life of their own. They weren't just tracks, they were memories, feelings, and broken pieces stitched together with love. Her voice grew stronger with every recording session, not because she wasn't hurting, but because she finally understood the power of singing through pain. One song in particular, "He Never Really Left," was so emotional that even the producers had to pause the session. When she played it at a private listening event, people cried openly. A fan told her, "Your father's love lives through your voice," and for the first time, Kelly believed it. Jack continued filming his documentary, but somewhere along the journey, it evolved into something more intimate. He realized that the world didn't need another rock documentary. They needed a human one. They needed to understand grief, healing, and love in the way the Osbournes experienced it. He filmed conversations with his mother about how she survived the hardest days. He filmed Kelly talking about the song that saved her. He filmed Amy painting in the quiet room. He filmed his own children placing flowers next to Ozzy's photos, asking innocent questions about a man they barely knew yet deeply loved through stories. Jack's narration was soft and reflective. He said, "We didn't lose a legend, we lost our hero, and this film is about finding him again in the world he left behind." The documentary became his way of honoring Ozzy, but also his way of teaching his children that love doesn't end with a heartbeat. Amy's transformation was quieter, but perhaps the most profound. She continued painting, exploring colors that expressed emotions too delicate for words. One day, she surprised the family by revealing a series of portraits she had been working on, 8 paintings, each representing a stage of their healing. The last one was a golden light surrounding a silhouette of Ozzy, almost glowing. Sharon gasped. Kelly covered her mouth. Jack said, "This is him. This is exactly him." Amy smiled softly and said, "I didn't paint Dad, I painted what he feels like now," and everyone understood. The foundation the family created soon became a global movement. Young musicians from around the world submitted songs, messages, and stories about how music saved them. The Osbournes personally funded scholarships, provided instruments, and created safe spaces for artists who felt lost. Sharon said proudly, "Ozzy gave so much, now we're giving back for him." One day during a foundation event, a young girl took the stage holding a worn-out guitar. She said, "I never met Ozzy, but his music stopped me from giving up." She started singing softly, trembling, but the room supported her. Sharon cried. Kelly hugged her. Jack recorded the moment. Amy painted the girl's silhouette later that week. Ozzy's legacy was no longer confined to past memories. It was shaping new futures. Near the end of the year, the family decided to visit one of Ozzy's favorite places, a quiet hill overlooking Los Angeles. He used to call it the breathing spot. They brought one of his jackets, his favorite sunglasses, and a small speaker to play his songs. As they sat together watching the sunset, Kelly said, "I can feel him." Amy whispered, "He never left." Jack nodded and said, "He's in everything we do." Sharon took a deep breath and whispered, "Then let's live well for him." As the sun disappeared behind the hills, something beautiful happened. The sky turned a deep purple, Ozzy's favorite color. The family looked at each other, smiling through their tears. It felt like a sign, a reminder that he was still with them in every moment that mattered. And Chapter 10 became the chapter of acceptance. Not acceptance of death, but acceptance of love's power to overcome it. It became the chapter where the Osbournes stopped asking, "How do we go on?" and started saying, "We go on with him." A legacy doesn't end with a life. A family doesn't end with grief. And love doesn't end at all. Ozzy Osbourne lived loudly, loved fiercely, and left beautifully. And the Osbourne family, stronger than ever, carried that love into every new chapter waiting ahead.